Two impactful seniors depart the program this offseason in Race Thompson and Miller Kopp. How will the Hoosiers go about replacing them moving forward?
You are Locked On Hoosiers, your daily podcast on the Indiana Hoosiers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, everybody. You are Locked On Hoosiers, the one and only daily IU podcast. We're part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. We're free and available anywhere you get your podcasts, including over at YouTube. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. I'm your host, Jacob Rude. I want to give a shout out to FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On and today's sponsor. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. One other shout out for those that missed it at the end of last week. Locked On is now partnered with Sirius XM. What does that mean? Well, you can find the Locked On podcast, whether it's Locked On Hoosiers, Locked On Colts, Pacers, whatever it may be. You can find them on the Sirius XM app. It also means that during the season, you can catch all the IU football and basketball games with the Sirius XM or the SXM app. Just search Hoosiers. I know there were visits or a specific visit with Mackenzie Mbako this weekend. We don't have anything about that visit at all. I waited until late to record this to see if we would find out anything. Nothing to talk about on that front. When we do get information, we will talk about it. So as I had been kind of teasing for a while now, talk about Race Thompson, and I grouped in Miller Kopp with this because I think both these seniors departing, we did an episode already on Trace Jackson Davis. These are the other two big losses in terms of graduation that the Hoosiers will have this season. I felt like you could kind of pair them together. Let's start off first talking about Race's season. It was maybe a little underwhelming. Statistically, it was a step back from the last two seasons, average 8.4 points per game, the fewest minutes he's played per game since his sophomore season, the fewest rebounds he'd averaged. It seemed like statistically he was the one who took the biggest backseat to Trace going up another level, but then you have Jalen Hood-Schifino as well. So statistically, it wasn't a great year for him. Efficiency-wise, worse than the last two seasons as well. Shot 59% after 53% last season. Having said all that, and we'll talk some other statistical stuff, he was still an impactful player. And I think his impact was felt most on the defensive end, where certainly prior to his injury, he was someone that was still really important to the Hoosiers. And I think the biggest sign of that is how far the Hoosiers dropped off in the immediate aftermath of losing Race Thompson. He goes out in that Iowa game. IU falls to Northwestern, get run out of the building, to be quite honest, by Penn State. And it was the defense that seemed like it had taken a pretty big step back. So the Hoosiers, I think that's one of your best examples of how important he was defensively. Still, though, he came back and he played a role. He was important in that Kent State game. He suddenly caught fire from three. What made that so surprising, though, is that never was a consistent part of his game. And I think that frustrated fans a lot, too. His lack of just an outside shot, really an offensive game at all, really held him back. And I think a lot of ways it really held the Hoosiers back. It really limited what they could do offensively. He was still one of the five best players for Indiana, but it wasn't a great fit. He only shot 27.9% from three this year. His last two seasons, he attempted 98 threes and shot 27.6% in total. It just wasn't. That 3-point shot never came about for him, and it really limited what he could do. the injury also kind of derailed his season and limited, I thought, what he could do. He didn't look right when he came back. He sat out a handful of games and was trying to get healthy, but it was a situation where IU needed him. They needed somebody they could rely upon. They brought him back maybe a little bit quickly, and he probably wasn't physically ready. Just in general, recovering from an injury in season is hard to do. The flip side to that is if you consider Race's season underwhelming, which I do, I mean, Miller Kopp's season is the opposite of that. Overwhelming, that might not be the right word, but it was certainly a bounce back season for him. I was a detractor of his last season, and I admitted many times I was wrong. I didn't think the Hoosiers needed to be playing him, needed to be starting him, and he stepped up in a big way and made me eat crow on that one. He jumped to 30 minutes per game, 8.1 points, but was shooting 44% on threes on 4 attempts per game. IU he was it when it came to reliable outside shooting. And so the pressure he faced to make those shots when he got them was immense. The fact he shot 44% was huge for Indiana. So that was, I mean, he too was impactful in a different way. If Race's impact came from the defense, Miller's came from the offensive end. Now, what I would also say is that Miller improved defensively as well. He was kind of played out of position. And so as a 3, he kind of was exposed a little bit, I thought, in Mike Woodson's first season here. He bounced back from that as well and made big improvements defensively that really helped Indiana. And what I would say about both of these guys, IU was kind of, I don't want to say put in a bad spot, but the fact that these two were 2 of the 5 best players for the Hoosiers, with Trace as well specifically, really made it tough for Indiana. We've talked a lot about how non-modern Indiana's offense was this season and how they need to change that and how they are changing that. You can read between the lines or just read the lines when you look at who they're bringing in the transfer portal. These two kind of typify that old school approach offensively. If this was 1996, IU would have had a tremendous roster. It would have been perfect for that time period. It's 2023, and when we look at the games where IU struggled, when teams would spread IU out and beat them off the dribble, it was kind of these two guys. Some of that I put on them. Some of that was just like IU's roster wasn't optimized. That was partially an Archie problem. That's who got Race Thompson here. I still chalk up a lot of the roster issues to Archie for these last 2 years. It's on Mike Woodson from here moving forward, certainly. But Miller Kopp wasn't an Archie guy. I can see why Mike Woodson wanted him, and he still provided value this past season. But they also kind of signified where Indiana struggled, I guess, during the season as well. I think in an ideal world, I don't know that either of these guys are on the roster for Mike Woodson. They might be, but they wouldn't be playing the roles that they did necessarily. It kind of forced the Hoosiers' hand, I guess is probably the best way of saying it. Having these two and having them as 2 of your 5 best players meant that IU kind of had to play a certain way that I don't think Mike Woodson wanted. Again, I'm not pointing blame at these guys. It's just kind of a consequence of the situation. IU was still really successful this year, but their ceiling was kind of limited, and ultimately we saw that they go, I don't want to say crashing out in the second round, but it wasn't great when things went bad, and these two were kind of typifying those problems, but both were still really impactful. They both, I think, leave interesting legacies at IU. I want to talk about that here in just a moment. First, though, make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs because right now new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 in bonus bets, no catch. Even if your first bet does not win, you get another shot at it. The NBA playoffs have been really exciting. Some absolutely wild individual performances on Sunday specifically, but Lakers Warriors is on again tonight if you want to catch that. There's been some really fun games. Knicks and Heat have been kind of back and forth. That's a real old school matchup for those of you that might enjoy some of the more old school games. I mean, that rivalry was kind of steeped in tradition from the 90s and whatnot. So there's no better place to bet on all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Big thanks to you guys for making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen every single day. Every dayers. This week on the show, we're going to continue doing these season recaps. So if you have thoughts on players, if there's players you want to discuss, let me know in the comments. Let me know on Twitter, on the reviews, whatever it may be. Let me know your thoughts on these players and things like that. We're going to continue doing that this week. We'll mix in the transfer news and rumors whenever it's applicable, but it really seems like things are starting to slow down quite a bit. Having said that, it might end up being a big week or busy week nonetheless. Let's talk kind of the legacy that these two leave at IU. It's certainly far, far less than the one Trace Jackson Davis left. But what I would say is Race is someone that genuinely gave it his all every time he stepped out on the floor for the Hoosiers. And I appreciate that. I think fans appreciated that. He was never, again, I feel like a lot of this is a caveat of when healthy. He was never someone that got out hustled, or he never was someone that wasn't giving 100%. That was never, when I say he was limited, it wasn't by effort. It was by skill, which kind of sounds more harsh, but he was always trying. Now, he never let those limitations slow him down. He still found ways to be an effective player. And I think because of that, he'll be remembered fondly in the long run. I know fans got pretty frustrated with him this season. At times, I was among them. I would say it, especially later on in the year, my frustration was more with the situation than him, and that he clearly wasn't 100%. But IU also didn't really have anyone else they could turn to. Malik Reneau tried, but he wasn't someone that could stretch out to the perimeter like Race Thompson could. Race didn't do it all that effectively, but it was not something he was comfortable doing yet, so he was kind of forced to play. I know fans were frustrated by that, but I hope that doesn't taint his overall legacy, because I think overall he's someone that always tried, always cared, always hustled, and those types of players endear themselves to the Hoosiers, or to the Hoosier faithful. To that point, I think a lot of that applies to Miller Kopp, and I think he definitely became a fan favorite this year. Again, I don't know that was the case last season. It's unquestionable it was the case this season. He was definitely a fan favorite, and a lot of the same things apply. He was someone that still gave effort. I don't think effort was often a problem for this team. I was going to say ever. You can probably point to certain games. That Penn State game, I think, is one that's always going to stick out, because it really felt like the team let go of the rope in that game and kind of gave up in that game, and that was really concerning. But outside of that, I don't think that happened at any other point in the season. Miller Kopp was another part of that. Like that's something you have to do as a team, is to have that kind of collective mindset. And both of these guys, if they typified what was wrong at times with Indiana, or the flaws, I guess, of this roster, they also typified a lot of things that went right. IU hustled and played hard and defended hard. And those were all qualities this team had, and both these guys were at the center of that. So I think that that's also fair and true to say. In different circumstances, these two might be seen even more fondly. Not that I don't want Trace at IU, but if there's a different time period where you drop these two in and they are your starting center and starting power forward, which I think were positions that better suited them, then I think things could have been different for how we look at them. I don't know how much, if it would have been more successful or not, but I think these two were forced into maybe uncomfortable situations in terms of their roles offensively, and they both did the best they could they made the best of the situation, I guess is the right way to put it. I'm going to remember Miller Kopp for the number of the big momentum threes it felt like he hit. It felt like he punctuated runs a lot of times. That trailing three on the wing, it felt like he always hit. Those corner threes really became a signature of his this season. So those were really important for Indiana, as we discussed. When you don't have any sort of consistent outside threat, the one guy you have, there's a lot of pressure for him to be that guy. And that it never wavered with him this year. And I think that's really impressive, because you could let that kind of get to you. And if you have a bad night, then a lot of fingers are pointed at you. There weren't a lot of bad nights for him. If you shoot 44% over the course of the season, you don't have too many bad nights. The only real bad night I can think of is off the top of my head was the game at Northwestern, which had a lot of extenuating factors to it. But I appreciate what these two brought to the table, even as much as they, I don't want to say held IU back, but they also were the reason in a lot of ways IU was successful. They were very much part of the success, maybe as much as they were a part of kind of those flaws. So I think both are going to be remembered fondly. This was a very fun, enjoyable, likable team that the Hoosiers had. We're all going to remember Trace and just kind of a byproduct of that, the guys Trace played with. I think we're going to remember these two guys fondly in that regard. We're going to remember some of the fun moments that these two had with this team. Now, having discussed all that, who replaces him? How does IU replace him next season? It's not going to be like, for better or for worse. We'll talk about that and who could step up in their shoes here in a moment. So if the Hoosiers are going to get more modern, which is the clear goal that they want, there isn't going to be like-for-like changes on this roster for these two guys. It's going to be a lot of overlap. You ideally want to take these two players and kind of mush them into one type of player. You don't want both Miller Kopp and Race Thompson on the floor. You want somebody that can do what Miller Kopp and Race Thompson did as one person. That's tough to do. That basically means you want to stretch four that can knock down threes and defend at a good level. Surprise, everybody in college basketball wants that. So it's hard to find that person. There are names that it could be. There's guys coming in via transfer. I think Anthony Walker is going to take a lot of the minutes left by these two, and it's a lot of minutes. That's something we talked about when discussing Race Johnson coming back. After Trace Jackson-Davis, Miller Kopp played the second most minutes on this team. Race's minutes, his total minutes aren't as high because of the injury, but he played 23 minutes a night, some of that limited by injury. But both of these guys were relied upon in big moments. So just that alone is going to be hard to replace. If you look at transfers, Anthony Walker is going to be kind of that guy. He's going to take some of those minutes. Kel'el Ware could be kind of the combination of those two. He's more of a center than a forward, but it's a little more fluid. And I think as someone that can space the floor and defend, that's what you're looking at. Malik Reneau is going to take some of those front court minutes. You have a pretty big hole to fill defensively when it comes to Race Thompson. He was a really good on-ball defender, which I think which helped Trace Jackson-Davis be the rim protector. He could take kind of the better of the big man options and allow Trace to stay at the front of the rim and deter shots there. If that's what you want Kel'el Ware to do this season, which it is, that means Malik Reneau kind of has to step into that role. An interesting name that could be set to have a breakout year, someone IU certainly turned to at the end of last season, is Kaleb Banks. I don't know that it's going to be interesting to see how IU uses him because he's kind of a 3-4 small forward, power forward tweener, which kind of describes these guys. He's certainly athletic, certainly has a ton of athleticism, doesn't have anything really resembling a jump shot yet. I don't even really remember him shooting this season from three-point range. He was 2 of 5, so he doesn't have a reliable three-point shot yet, but he's going to step in. IU, in terms of like a forward that can space the floor, doesn't seem right now they're going to have that unless Mbako comes to Bloomington, which is a big if. They have a center that can do that, which, I mean, that's fine. It just changes the dynamic of the team, but I think IU probably needs that. With Thompson, like I said, you're going to have to find some defense in that front court, whether it's Reneau, who had trouble fouling, whether it's Kel'el Ware, who is going to protect the rim probably better than Race Thompson did, whether it's Walker, whether it's Kaleb Banks. Somebody among that group is going to have to step up defensively because there's big shoes to fill in that regard. Peyton Sparks probably factors in here as well. I consider him more of a traditional center. That's why I haven't really mentioned him. I'm trying to think more of kind of the forwards, and Sparks I consider more of a center. I only really mentioned Ware because I think he can bring the floor spacing aspect that Kopp did and the rim protection part of defense that could kind of bridge some gaps there. But IU isn't going to have a like-for-like replacement for these two guys, for better or for worse. We'll see how much these guys are missed. Like we said, though, what is going to be maybe hardest to replace is the level they played at night in and night out. They brought intensity. They brought that hustle, that determination night in and night out. And that's the highest bar that they set when it comes to who's stepping in next. Whether it's Ware, who that motor has been the issue, whether it is Reneau, whether it is Walker, whether it is Banks, whether it's whoever it may be, having that level of effort and intensity every night and playing with that and sustaining that throughout a long season, it's going to be tough to do. It's a testament to the high bar that they set. Sparks might be the type of guy that can meet that bar based on the highlights and how we've kind of seen him play, but they certainly set a high bar in that regard. Let me know what you guys thought of their season. Were you impressed, disappointed? Who steps in to replace these guys? I want all your guys' thoughts down below in the YouTube comments, on Twitter, whatever it may be. We can kind of discuss these as we move forward and do some of these player recaps. What are your guys' thoughts on this? So thanks for making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen every single day. Everydayers, like I said, we're going to continue doing these season recaps. We're going to bounce back and forth between men's and women's basketball and keep this going. So let me know who you want to talk about next, who you want to discuss. We'll continue doing that this week. And we're going to have whatever transfer news comes about, whatever high school recruit news comes about, we'll have as well. Be sure to follow us on Twitter so you can stay up to date on all of that. Subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Most importantly, though, guys, hope everybody has a terrific start to your week on this Monday. And most importantly, LAO.